What's going on, everybody? My name's John Paz. Welcome to episode 21 of Destination Talk.
And I am Harry, and we are coming to you again from Chop Studios, located at 750 Route 34 in Matawan, New Jersey. And once again, thank you to our show sponsor, the Academy. To sign up for a free class, you can reach them at 908-540-6936. Today, we are joined by someone who lives at the intersection of sports, media, and storytelling, Nick Kosko. Nick is a seasoned broadcaster, recruiting analyst, and media personality who has covered college football, wrestling, and everything in between. From breaking into the industry to the rise of NIL to what separates top-tier athletes, Nick shares insights you won't want to miss. Nick, thank you for being a part of the show and for coming in. How are you today?
Appreciate you, boys. I'm good. It's nice to see the actual setup. I've been watching you guys kind of develop this podcast all the way through, so it's really cool to see.
Yeah, I mean we're into the 20s now, so I guess we're climbing. We're climbing now. So Nick, for those who may not know much about you, can you give us a little bit about your background? What attracted you? What got you into the sports media world?
Pretty much, I was an athlete growing up, not a very good one, obviously. We probably have a different conversation if I was a top-tier athlete. But, I grew up, just started doing, karate, soccer, all that good stuff. And I eventually started playing football. Then I started wrestling in middle school, but I always wanted to pursue athletics. I was always a big football fan growing up. I'm still a diehard Eagle fan to this day. So I initially thought, okay, I want to do something with sports with my life, probably. But at a certain point, I was like, I'm not going to be a top-tier Division I athlete. I think I came to the realization probably in middle school, then early high school. I'm like, I'm not going to go to college and go play sports, whether it's football or wrestle. So I was like, I always had an interest, I should say, in broadcasting. So if you're an Eagle fan, you probably know Merrill Reese, their longtime radio voice. So I always found myself kind of imitating him when I would, and I always watched. If you have the old school Comcast,
right.
The old school Comcast on demand. They had these shortened highlight packages of like your local team, but they would play the radio calls and not the TV calls. So I started just memorizing just random Merrill Reese calls from like week 5 of the 06 season. You know what I mean? So that's when I started getting into it. Then I found myself, I'm also, I may come across as like someone who's just like all about working out, athletics. I'm a bit of a nerd too. I'm a video game nerd too. So I used to play Madden growing up too. So I was like, I would start calling the games as mute it, start calling them as I'm playing it. But bit of a way to cheat almost. Like what's going to happen. So that's how I kind of got into it. Then just make a long story short, I just said, all right, I want to get into how do I keep doing this from a different perspective, whether it's writing about it or broadcasting it. So it evolved from writing in high school, school newspaper, eventually the yearbook, and I got to college too. That's where I got my start at Glory Days magazine, a South Jersey publication covering high school sports. Dave O'Sullivan, big shout out to him. He gave me my first break. I was actually live tweeting my alma mater's high school football scores, and he was like, "Hey, can I try you out?" Found out I was a journalism major, so it kind of ballooned from there. Got into the student radio station at Rutgers, WRSU. And then I graduated from Rutgers in 2018, so it went from there, and then a couple jobs later, it led me now to On3, where I work presently. I'm in my 3rd year with the company. We just bought Rivals. People know what Rivals is, so we're probably the go-to source for college sports and NIL and transfer portal. So I'm glad I write for them, work for them, and do a little broadcasting on the side as well for them. In terms of at least the wrestling coverage. Then obviously I do play-by-play broadcasting for high school sports and college sports, namely, obviously, Rutgers Wrestling. Right. Is I try to rep my alma mater all the time. So been doing that for about 10 years now in totality. So it's been kind of crazy that I've been doing it for so long, even though I feel still so fresh in the business.
So what was that defining moment in your career that you said, this is the career path I want to go down?
Probably in college. I didn't know what I wanted to do exactly in the field yet when I was a freshman, so that's when I got back into wrestling. I joined the club wrestling team at Rutgers. I wrestled for them for 4 years, competed a little bit again, albeit not great. No national tournament qualifications. I ended up being the president of our team my senior year while competing. So that was a fun balance. But I think my sophomore year when I figured out that I wanted to do something maybe other than just writings. I thought about writing for the Daily Targum at Rutgers, and I was thinking about our vision, maybe the TV and the production side. But then I got into radio because I was always a sports radio fan, just listening to local stuff and South Jersey and Philly area radio down by me. I knew about the New York sports radio legends like Chris Mad Dog Russo, Mike Francesa. Yep. I interned for Mad Dog himself when I was a senior in college. So when I ended up interning at Sirius XM, that I worked there part time for about 2 years. So I kind of knew radio was the way I wanted to go at first. So student radio station, WRSU, did that. And then I just started getting back into it. Okay, I could host shows, produce shows. The play-by-play aspect, what really grew there was I always had an interest in that. And then once I started calling games as a student, my first broadcast ever actually was a wrestling match because we never did wrestling on the radio at the station until I came along. So did that. I believe that was my sophomore year. So they wrestled Michigan State. I think they shut them out, actually, now I'm thinking about it. Nice first win and to call on the radio. And then it ballooned into basketball. And obviously when I became a junior and senior, a lot more football. Then I was like, all right, this is what I want to do. And this is what I wanted to pursue. And ultimately, if I had like a dream goal in my profession, it'd be to broadcast at the highest levels, either it's football, basketball, wrestling, you name it. So that really opened up my path. Like, all right, yeah, this is definitely what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the differences to people who may not understand? Because calling a game on television versus the radio are two different things. You're painting a picture for people on the radio because they're dependent upon you because you're seeing it for them. Whereas on television, you're kind of telling the audience what they're seeing. So, like, what are those differences between the two?
Yeah, I've done both, either as a student or as a professional. So I was doing radio after college down in South Jersey on 97.3 ESPN. So I did. I hosted a Friday night show, kind of like a Friday night red zone show for the high school football. Then we started doing games again. So did radio there. Obviously, I do Big Ten Plus for Rutgers, mostly for wrestling. A little bit, I've sprinkled some basketball and baseball too, but that's TV. And now with the high school football that I do now on Cape Atlantic Live, that's YouTube. So it is video streaming. So you treat it like a television broadcast. But the main difference, like you pretty much just summed it up. To put it in layman's terms, you're painting a picture on radio. You want the listener to feel like they're actually there at the event, or heck, you can say, this is how you're going to picture it on TV. Like that's why the old school guys say we're going left to right. You describe where it is on, because your vantage point's the same from the TV broadcaster's vantage point usually. So what you're describing, they're probably going to see on the television screen anyway. So you try to balance it between that. Then obviously with TV, the viewer and the listener, they can see what's going on. So give them something that they don't know, and you give them a little bit less description. You kind of add a bit of a, nuance is the wrong word, but you add a little flair to the broadcast is what I want to say. So like when a big play happens, obviously you can hear everything, you can see everything, everyone's going nuts. The broadcasters add to it and then let it breathe. So I think that's been a nice balance I've still tried to work on and definitely learn. It definitely took me a couple of years to get out of radio mode to transition to TV. And now it's like, I need to go back to radio because I started doing a little bit more wrestling for Rutgers on the radio this year, including the NCAA tournament in Philadelphia. And I was like, oh, I need to remember to like describe almost everything that's going on rather than just let it breathe.
Yeah, because that has to be challenging because wrestling, a lot of times, as I've come to learn in the last few years watching John, there's not always something going on. So like you have to avoid that dead air time too. So you're really telling a story to those listeners on the radio.
Yeah, especially when you're doing it solo. I've done plenty of solo broadcasts, and I'll use NCAA's this year in Philadelphia as an example where I'm broadcasting. Obviously John still knows all the guys. I'm calling a Yars match for instance, and especially at heavyweight where we know there's a little bit less action than 125. But a guy like him, he can make something happen. But you have to constantly describe. All right, what lead leg does he have forward? Is it right or left? What part of the mat are they on? Are they on the outside, on the far side boundary? Are they hand fighting? Is he defending and getting rid of collar ties with his right hand? What's their positioning like? So the more you do that, you avoid the dead air. You don't want to overload somebody, but I think if you want to paint a picture, especially for a sport like wrestling, for people who are listening to wrestling on the radio are probably the diehards anyway. So if you can give them that picture, they're like, okay, I know exactly what's going on right now, and I have that big mental picture if I'm driving in the car or just listening on radio.
I feel like this, and like in wrestling specifically, you guys are the ones that really grow the sport for us. Yes, our sport is, people are going to watch it, but the broadcasters what really brings it to another level, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that there's definitely a part of it to that. Is I think if you have a good broadcaster, and I don't like to toot my own horn that much, but I do find that from the compliments that I've received for the Rutgers coverage and even just the college wrestling coverage in general, I feel like my responsibility as a wrestling broadcaster or other guys that are the Shane Sparks, where I have a lot of respect for Shane, and him and I have gotten along really well. Guys like that really can elevate the sport because of their enthusiasm for it. You're treating it like a big event. You don't want to treat wrestling as like, all right, I want to remind you, this is a niche sport, so we're going to explain to you why it's neat. No. You want to explain like this is a huge sport, NCAA's. We saw this year
Yeah,
on
this
ESPN.
year was huge this year.
Right, you see Wyatt Hendrickson beat Gable Steveson. That made national news, and you see Wyatt Hendrickson, going on Fox News, making CNN, and he goes and he's like the mainstay on the Pat McAfee show all of a sudden. So it's like you want to get it to the casual audience and say this is how it can be big, and it's still a long way to go. You're never going to catch football in this country. You're never going to catch basketball either, but you can be a mainstay of the collegiate athletics if you promote it as such, as like, this is a big event. This is a big deal. You don't want to just say, we need to explain it to our niche audience because they're the ones who are going to either praise / criticize you the most. You want to try to appeal to a casual audience, and sometimes that comes with the backlash from diehard fans. Like, yeah, we know this already. Like, give us something we don't know. It's like, well, you want to. Those same diehard fans are like, we need to appeal to a broad audience. Well, this is kind of how you do it.
As a huge hockey fan, and I'm a Rangers fan, so your Flyers I'm not too fond of.
Unfortunately,
I'm a Devils fan. We got the three around here.
But like I think it was similar to what Fox did when they put the blue dot over the puck because they were trying to attract the person who didn't watch the game. And as a fan of hockey who's fortunate enough to follow the puck, I'm like, I hate this.
Yeah.
Like, I understand why you're doing it, but can I like hit a button to get this to come off my television? Because I don't need a blue dot to tell me where the puck is.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's frustrating, but I understand why they would do that. Because they're trying to attract a different audience.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the hockey stuff. I mean, you could say it with football. A lot of times, especially if you're. Actually, I'll even use the example of college football because again, I'm covering college football year round where I work at On3. So me and the rest of my staff, when we watch a game on a Saturday, it's like, geez, like these announcers are dragging. We say it to ourselves, like these announcers are dragging. Like, we know this information, or like we have to track sports television and sport, all these debate shows and whatnot. It's like you're appealing to the casual fan or the fan that's not going to know the nitty gritty stuff. And I think that's sometimes, I think people in my profession, when we're not the ones saying it on TV, we're not like the big star on TV, when we're behind the scenes a little bit or off camera, where I think we're the ones that struggle a little bit with television and radio criticism. It's like, well, if we were in these guys' spot, we would do the same thing. And you want to broaden your audience, you have to quote unquote dumb it down a little bit. You have to make it simple for everybody. You can have the nitty gritty conversations. There's definitely a market for those in depth conversations with the nuances of each sport, whether it's technique or it's it's history, but you still have to appeal to the broad audience if you want to, quote unquote, grow your sport or reach a bigger audience.
So what does your day-to-day life look like with someone in your position?
So at On3, I thank goodness I work remote. And I always like to say, when I started working at 24/7 Sports back in 2020, this is after I worked at Sirius XM part-time and did all my other broadcasting seasonally, fall, winter, and spring. I got a full-time job at 24/7 Sports. I worked remotely. I always like to say I worked remotely before it was cool. So this, so it was right before COVID hit. And then so it's pretty much the same thing at On3. I'm on the news desk. So right now, I'm off on Thursdays and Fridays usually, mostly during the season, and sometimes that bleeds into the off season, and I'm sure my schedule will change, even after this podcast comes out. But I wake up 8 to 4 every day that I work, a little 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. shift. Right now, as we sit in middle of May, it's a little bit less hectic because there's less news going on. We're trying to find, search wins. Basically just try to find, what can be viral content. But generally, we're transcribing a lot of press conferences. We're writing a lot of stories about what these coaches say, a lot of spin outs, a lot of reactions. So we track all those ESPN shows, Get Up, First Take. If, Stephen A. Smith has something crazy to say, we might transcribe it and turn it into a story because it relates to, something in the NFL or something in college. So but think of it simply 8 to 4 for 8 hours. I'm writing a lot of stories, just a lot of straight news. Just getting it out there, then I'm off shift. Then from there, I do whatever else I got to do. Sometimes those days combine with broadcasting days. So, for example, like football season, I'll off on a Friday, but I'll make sure I work on my boards, during the week, my spotting charts, and get ready for the high school game on Friday. Same goes for wrestling. Do all that preparation. Either I could balance it with shift or after shift, and make sure all that stuff's prepared for a Friday night broadcast or a Sunday broadcast. So that's when I'm getting my on-air stuff ready to go as well. But so it may sound like a lot, but sometimes it can be very simple. And right now it's pretty, once I'm done at 4 o'clock, it's like, all right, it's kind of turn the sports brain off and do whatever I got to do around the house, or I go work out or I go to training, and then kind of just do it all over again the next day.
How much preparation do you have to put in, or do you put in personally, say to a Friday night Rutgers wrestling match. You know, you're getting ready to prepare to call that.
I mean, guys like John make it easy. You know, when they're that accessible, and you know, you have a lot of information. Especially, you know, again, I'll just use John as an example. Just having broadcasted him for, I mean, I think a grand total of, when you're on the map, like what, 5 total seasons at this point.
Yeah, 5. Yeah.
So, yeah. So like a guy like him who's been on the team for so long, or wasn't on the team for so long, it's easy. Like
Right.
I know his history pretty much in and out. When I go into a broadcast, I'm like, yeah, all right, he was an All-American here. He had X amount of wins this year, and you know, he already beat this guy twice, or you know, all right, he's looking for payback against this guy. So when you have guys like that, where you get familiar with a specific team, that definitely does help. New guys, you obviously have to research. You want to talk to them. I think for Rutgers, it's a little bit of a different situation, just because I've been around the program for a decade, so I've gotten to know Coach Goodale really well, Coach Pollard, Coach Middich. Obviously, I'm getting to know Coach Labriole a little bit, but even guys in the past like Coach Pritzloff, Coach Leonardis, like I got to know those guys pretty well, dating back to my student days. So it was easier to get information and you know, tidbits, or just, you know, getting a vibe around the team, you know, and having, you know, they're a little bit more free flowing with the information that is good for the air. And then it helps when you get to know the athletes, you know, when they're giving you that much access, you know, during media days or before matches or even during practices. That did help. And then you know, so the Rutgers preparation's easy. If they're wrestling Michigan State, Penn, or like Illinois coming in, you know, that I will do my best to, if I want to get in touch with the opposite team, whether it's the opposing coach or some of the other wrestlers, or just gathering information. I usually, you know, read through the roster, make sure I have all the records, weights, accolades down. That's the bare bones. And then if I find stories from either previous broadcasts or previous news articles, I'll try to weave that stuff in there. I'm a big believer in, you need to know the name, their accolades, especially for wrestling, name, accolades, weight, class, and basically the record at that point, and maybe some like matchup history if they have it. But other than that, the other stories come in when you need to throw them in, which I don't think is often. I think people are mostly there. They're watching a wrestling match. They want to see what happens. You want to add the flair into it? Sure, I'll do that with football as well. But all those other stories, I think baseball is more of a storytelling sport. Football, basketball, wrestling, people are designed to just want to see it or listen to the action that's going to happen in the next 2 hours.
Baseball has built-in downtime. You know, there's in between pitches, the ball is hit, foul ball, stuff like that. So I would imagine there are more stats and or little tidbits you have to be aware of to talk about.
Yeah, baseball is definitely more of a heavy preparation type thing. I actually did not call a baseball game this season, but usually when I do for Rutgers, you know, it's not many anymore. But you know, I'll do, on an average year, the past couple of years, it's been a range of, you know, 2 to 5 or 6 games in total for the entire season. You know, they're all home games too. Whether I'm doing play-by-play or color, you know, that's when I've been able to kind of do both sides of the mic right there. But mostly that's just, you know, you need to be aware of these stories, and you have to be able to, you know, especially, you know, my broadcast partner usually for those is Dom Savino, who I graduated with. He does all the other Rutgers sports on Big Ten Plus except wrestling, basically. So, but he's a great storyteller. But going into that, it's like, hey, all right, Dom, what stories are we doing, you know, for this game? You know, I think we did Steve Owens's. I think it was a milestone win. I think it was like his 1,000th career victory or something like that. It was a couple of years ago, and we basically almost framed the entire broadcast around that if it was going to happen. So that's just one example of like, all right, here's a tidbit about that. Here's like a little, like he coached this player's dad, like the guy the team they're playing today. Steve Owens coached, you know, that player's father, or he played with, it's like stuff like that. And I'm kind of just like throwing it all together right there. But it's stuff like that you have to kind of dig up for a sport like baseball, football, basketball, wrestling. Yeah, I can dig that stuff up, but it's like, how often am I going to use it? And then I like to just, you know, keep it simple for the most part.
So is there a moment or an interview during your career so far that stands out as like that pinch me moment, or it was like really, really cool?
Probably Tim Tebow.
Tebow?
Yeah, I've interviewed. Now I've talked to him 3 times already, but I got him first, or I was at 24/7, and then I was able to get him again at On 3. I think it's either been 3 or 4 times now. I think I've actually lost track at this point. But I got him at On 3, and it was more of a natural conversation. It wasn't kind of like, not saying the one at 24/7 was forced, but it was kind of just thrown on my plate. I'm like, oh, I could talk to him. And then now this time, the last couple of times I've talked to him, it's been a little bit more natural. And then I think if you want to talk about a pinch me moment, John, it's The last time I talked to him was right before the Sugar Bowl this year, so a couple months ago. So was that 4 months ago now? He actually recalled me from like he's like oh we're running it back already, and it was like only a few months after we talked in the fall. So I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like he actually like him knowing who I was really cool. Was he's doing those media obligations pretty much all day. He's banging out 10 to 15 minute podcast hits for 3-4 hours, and yeah, he's got to run his All-State sponsor and what he's doing with the DreamWorks team and whatnot. So that was a pinch me moment. Other guys like I've interviewed Michael Irvin before when I was at 24/7. Franco Harris, obviously before he passed, which that was really cool. But I a lot of those were the pinch me moments. And I think now it's kind of I think I get a little nervous sometimes when I talk to like a big figure either in wrestling or football. I'm just like, oh, I can't believe I'm talking to this guy. But then it kind of hits me again. I'm like, oh, like this is your job. Like this is what you're supposed to be doing. So it kind of brings me back down to earth a little bit. So anytime I talk to a wrestler or even a college coach, especially, as I think my name's growing in the space. So it's like, oh, it's kind of cool. Like they kind of know who I am. And I'm just like, we can have a free flowing conversation at that point.
I shared that with you too, because we had Eric LeGrand on recently, and we drove over to his coffee house together, and he asked me how I was doing. I said, I'm just feeling a little nervous about this one today. We'd already done like 17 episodes or 16 at that point. But, but once you started talking to him, and I'm sure it's similar to you, it just starts to flow and you realize he's no different. He's going to answer your questions, and I'm sure you've experienced that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think when you talk to somebody that big, whether it's it's an Eric LeGrand for all the Rutgers fans or the Jersey fans, it's like oh he's a big figure, and I think maybe I don't want to speak for him, but I think because he obviously broadcasts football as well as a color analyst, and I'm sure he was at one point he was just like, ooh, like I'm talking to a lot of people that are listening to me now, and I don't want to screw it up. And I think it's the same way for if you're hosting a podcast, you're interviewing somebody, it's like you just don't want to screw it up. Like I go back to. I was a student at Rutgers when I first talked to Coach Goodale. Now like him and I could text each other just about wrestling. It's kind of crazy how that relationship's evolved. But when I was a student and you're interviewing these guys, and I think it was the same way. Was we interviewed? I'm almost blanking on it now. Oh no, not interviewing. I'm sorry. It was pregame. And I think it was only a year out of college, and I was we were talking to Steve Peichel pregame. So staying within the Rutgers universe right here, but it's like when you don't do it when you do it the first time, it's like, oh, you're the professional, and so like this is what you're supposed to be doing. But I was fresh out of college, and in the example with Coach Goodale, I was still a student, and we had him in studio a couple of times for our student radio show, and I'm like. He's in person. Like this is kind of like we're not talking to you 5 minutes before the match. Like we're gonna be in here for like 45 minutes talking. Right. And even for a pregame conversation with Coach Peichel, when I broadcasted a basketball game on Big Ten Plus right at like a year out of college, and I'm talking to Coach Peichel, and I've never actually spoken to him in my life in person like this. So I was kind of nervous, but it was just me. I think I was with Dom that day, so it was like just me, Dom, and we were right in front of him, and I'm just like, I'm in his office, and I'm like, I don't want to ask him a dumb question. so I'm just like, well, I don't want to ask him like, hey, coach, you gonna win tonight? One of those things. You want to do your research. So I think it happens, but then you do it. Once you do it enough time, it's like riding a bike. It's like doing something in your sport. Whether you're working out or you're doing jiu-jitsu, wrestling, football, whatever the case. Once you do something enough times, you're like, okay, it's like taking another breath.
Yeah, for us, we're on episode 21. Right. I mean, when we first started, we weren't, we were very. I was nervous coming in. I was like, I've never done any of this before. I got my degree, through Rutgers journalism degree, and I was like, well, this helped me a little bit, but I never actually did it. And now that we're kind of doing it, and another thing too is you interviewed me so many times. Now I'm kind of like switching it here, and I feel like this is pretty cool. But yeah,
no, it is, and I had wanted to do something like this for a while, and then I kind of pitched it to him last summer, and. The relationship that we have, we've kind of been coach and athlete for a while, and he was like, yeah, let's go. And it was like, all right, well, what do we do? Like, I don't where do we start? Like, we don't have a studio. We're trying to figure this out. And he goes, Dave. And like, okay, yeah, let's go talk to him and figure it. And now it's just like, now I'm just cold DMing people on Instagram, and they're getting back to me, and they're like, I'd love to be on.
Right. I think people overlook that. They're just like, what's the worst they're going to do? Not answer or say no.
Say no.
And you really can't take it personally. And sometimes maybe, I don't know if you had any experience, but I mean, I know people sometimes want to make it personal. It's like, oh, I don't, we have X amount of subscribers. It's not a huge podcast, or like I'm just getting started. And it's like sometimes these people, especially if they're a bigger name, they could throw it back in your face like, no, you don't have a big enough platform, or not answer or say no, but don't take it personally. But sometimes they'll give you that break. It's like, yeah, I appreciate you reaching out. Sometimes they just want to talk, and they just want to hear themselves talk sometimes.
Yeah, I think a lot of people want to tell their story, and they like to tell it. And I don't look like he'll say, hey, this one's doing well, or this episode. I'm like, honestly, I don't even look at the numbers. Like he was reading some.
I'm a numbers guy.
Yeah, he was reading some of the comments to me, and I'm like, I really don't care. Like I'm not in this for that. I'm doing this because it's fun. I've met so many interesting and wonderful people in these 21 episodes so far, and it's been a great time. And we keep coming back to the Jackson Turley episode we had. That episode definitely generated some pop from an individual somewhere out in the Midwest.
Jackson will give you some numbers. I can tell you that.
He definitely did. So I want to transition over to NIL. I'd like to get your opinion on how it's affecting the college landscape today. I think it's even trickling down to high school at this point as well. So how has this changed the game? College sports.
It's changing a lot. I mean, it's changing every day, and we talk about it at work every day because we have a whole NIL subset of our website, and that's what On3 was almost founded on. Was like our CEO Shannon Terry, our founder, who founded Rivals and 24/7. So he wanted to pitch this new site, his third iteration of this college sports space, and forums and recruiting and all that good stuff, and just coverage of college sports. He pitched it on like NIL's coming. I mean, our site's now about 3 years old officially. So you go back to the early days of NIL, which was pretty much 3-4 years ago at this point, and it's still kind of new. Same thing with the transfer portal, and I think COVID kind of, I guess you could say, screwed everything up too, especially with the transfer portal. We see it in wrestling all the time. These 6th, 7th year guys, and you're like, how the heck does he have eligibility? Right. So, but it happens in every sport too. So I think NIL is constantly changing, and that the fact that we got kind of on the ground floor with it at On3 was huge. It's changed everything because now it's, people want to call it pay for play. It might very well be. I don't like to call it pay for play, but that's what it's acting like right now. Right. If you go back 5-6 years ago, before it really became a thing, really blew up, it's like, all right, what would you think name, image, and likeness is? People were fighting about the NCAA football video game back 10 years ago. It's like,
was it Bannon, I believe, with the basketball?
Yeah, right. So it goes back to, I think the last iteration was 2014. So it's like the game wasn't around for 10 years because players were just like, well, if you're going to use our likeness, we should get paid for it. NCAA didn't want to do that, so that's why you had, I'll use Reggie Bush, was known as number 5 for USC back in 06.
Well, the old Tecmo Bowl for Nintendo,
right? Yeah,
that's how it was. You knew it was Bo Jackson, but it wasn't Bo Jackson,
right? Yeah. So you talk about the name, image, likeness. What you wanted it to be was like, yeah, if you're going to use Reggie Bush's name in a video game, he gets compensated for that. If you're going to, say if you're John Poznansky and like a car wash wants to sponsor you because like they believe in you as an athlete, that's what it was meant to be. Like, hey, I'm going to promote this car wash or this car dealership or this local restaurant because they believe in me. They want to pay me for advertisement, essentially. It's like, yeah, I'm all for that. Am I all for the college athletes getting paid the way they are now? Yes, but also there's no cap on it. And I think the problem is right now you have no cap on it. There's going to be other schools, like I think it was just Miami now that landed. It was the number 1 overall football recruit in next year's recruiting class in 2026, a 5-star lineman. And there's a lot of back and forth like, oh, no, it wasn't all about the money. It's like, don't hide behind it. Miami has the resources to pay you the most amount of money. Yeah, you might have had the best relationship with Mario Cristobal and the rest of the Miami staff, but money, you can't say money was not a factor. And I don't know all the figures, but essentially if a school like Miami, Alabama, whatever the case may be, if they're going to pay you the most money and you take the most money, I'm not going to blame a kid for that because you get paid in college. So I think it's good and bad, but because there's no cap, I think the revenue sharing will help when that eventually comes down to fruition, where everyone kind of gets an equal amount to spend. That's fine, and people can make essentially the same. But the problem is those schools that already had a lot of money, they're still going to have a lot of money because they have the bigger donors, they have the bigger brand recognition, the boost.
Like
there's no rule or cap against these boosters funneling in funds because what they call collectives. And I think at that point, until that's figured out, and I don't know if that's ever going to get figured out, or if it gets figured out, not going to be for a while. There's going to be a lot of trial by fire with NIL for the next, let's just say, 5 to 10 years before we have a firm grasp on, okay, this works collectively for football, basketball, then all the non-rev sports, the wrestlings, the field hockeys, the baseballs. And, once you get to that point where it's like, all right, there's less of a danger that these non-revenue sports are going to get cut. I think that's where like, okay, NIL is fine, but I think until then we're going to have a lot of battles either on and off the field when it comes to NIL.
It's like the Wild Wild West.
It still is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on your podcast that you had me on, I had my own point of view on it, but I also feel like, yes, you want to make money as an athlete, but there's no more loyalty. I feel like if you go to one school, it should be like the NFL. You sign a contract, and if you breach that contract, you have to sit out a year or something like that. Kind of bring that rule back because people are just going from one school to the next. But
I mean, it is funny you mentioned that because I think and I know President Trump and Nick Saban, they're trying to get that college sports commission together. So that's still in its early stages as far as like what that actually is going to be. But I think, at least in Coach Saban's mind, is there should be a cap in terms of how much money you make. Actually, I shouldn't say that. There should be a cap in how much you can spend. Kind of but at a certain point, these kids are all gonna have to be employees, and that's where the amateurism thing comes back. And there is no more amateurism, even though they still technically are amateurs. But that's where, okay, if you sign a contract to a school, okay, how much of it is going to weigh between your academics? Like, are you still signing on as a student, or are you signing on as an actual school employee? That's also allowed to quote unquote be a student. So there's a lot of gray area with it. There's a lot of different segments of think of like a large tree. There's a bunch of different branches off of it. So I don't know what the exact solution is. John, I like your idea. Like, if you're gonna say if you sign your scholarship, but you have an NIL package on top of that. But when you sign it, you have to stay at that school for a minimum, let's say 2 years, before you can say reopen for negotiation or hit the transfer portal.
Correct.
And they kind of go hand in hand together. So if you're trying to fix the NIL, you have to fix the transfer portal and the free transfer. Now I'm fine with the player movement and athlete movement because coaches can do it ad nauseum. But again, the problem is like they're allowed to just leave whenever they want at this point, and because with NIL. Let's just say, hey, X school offers this athlete this amount of money. Say, hey, we can get you this if you go into the portal. There's no penalty against that, and generally there's supposed to be that is against the rules. You're tampering. So we've seen public examples of that. I'm sure we've all heard private examples of that, whether it's football, basketball, wrestling. It's like, had this guy go in the portal, then he's committing 12 hours later to this school. It's like you're supposed to let the process play out. So I don't know the exact fix, but I do like the maybe you kind of rein in the transferring a little bit in terms of you get one free transfer, and then I think grad transfers should still be allowed to just go wherever they want at that point with no penalty. But especially if there's an NIL package attached to it, I think at that point you'd be like, all right, if you're gonna or maybe forfeit your NIL purse back to that school, or the opposing school has to pay. X school has to pay Y school. Okay, we're gonna get him the transfer. We're gonna pay him this. We have to pay the other school. It's kind of like trades in the NBA. It's like we'll give you cash on top of it.
They should use the framework that the NFL and the NBA use. If you want to make it like that, make it more of a business. If you want to do that, and that's the route NCAA wants to go, why don't you use that framework? Because it's the wild, wild west.
What concerns me as a fan is that these smaller schools, and I don't want to use the term, but they're like becoming almost minor league programs in a way to the Power Fours, because if you have a school like Alabama, not singling them out, but if they have guys going into the draft, they lose guys to the portal and what have you, graduation. Well, why would they bring a 17 or an 18-year-old in if some kid's played at University of X and has game tape at a smaller school? I know that guy can play because all these coaches are still competing for their own jobs.
Yeah, it's a fine balancing act between all of those. Like, these coaches are still trying to say, yeah, we still want to, we believe in our high school development. A guy like Davos Sweeney over at Clemson, he's a big believer in the high school development, and he was very anti-transfer portal because he wanted to keep all his guys in-house and wanted to develop himself. Now they're finally tapping into the portal a little bit because they do see the
Clemson's
reality.
Been one of the last schools to kind of come to this,
right? And that's a within the context of the last decade and last 15 years, they've been historically a good program. They won multiple national titles. They just got back to the playoff this year. Now they're kind of going the route of the portal again, like where they're going to start bringing more guys in, and that you have to get with the times at that point. But yeah, it is a fascinating situation where it's like, yeah, we can get this seasoned guy. He'll play for us for a year. We'll pay him amount of money, but it's worth the investment if it helps us win a conference title or helps us win a national championship.
Yeah, one example I saw, I think it was college basketball. St. John's, I think I heard the coach say like they're just going out for portal guys. There's no recruiting.
I'm a huge St. John's college basketball.
I think you
fan.
and I were talking about that.
Yeah, we were. I'm a huge fan, and so hypocritical here. I'm not complaining, but they've brought in 5 guys already. 4 of them are going to start with their one leftover, and they're already like a preseason number 5.
Yeah,
and potentially with the talent. Now they have to come together. They got to mesh. They got to and they got to peak at the right time. But I just don't know how fair it is to the smaller schools. Like I wonder aloud, and I've said this to a few people: will we ever see that Cinderella team in the NCAA basketball tournament again, like the Loyola of Chicago? Going to the Final Four or having that run 2 out of 3 years? Because if you're a good player on one of those teams, and a St. John's is looking for a player, I can offer that guy their best player the most money, and he'll potentially come play for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know what the future holds for that. Basketball, again, all sports are different. I think basketball is a little bit different, so you can still see the Cinderella runs in the tournament, but it is going to get top heavy where even the basketball traditional schools where you only think of that school as a basketball school. It's not like we see how Alabama's doing well in basketball right now, how good Auburn is in basketball, but those are football schools. Right. You mentioned St. John's, where that's a basketball school. Right. Like that's basketball, and there's like, oh yeah, we happen to have other activities at this school. You know what I mean? So it's
the
like
baseball team in the early '80s and '90s was very good because they had guys like Frank Viola, John Franco go there in the past. But
but you're right. How like Rick Pitino said it out loud. He's like, this is the reality. Like I need seasoned guys. I can't develop unless I'm getting. Look at again. Duke got him, so maybe it's a bad example, but Duke got Cooper Flagg, and
they got him for 1 year.
Right, they got him for 1 year. He goes to the NBA, and they're used to that. But it's like you're not like a team like St. John's or a school like St. John's or a school like I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but like let's even say like a basketball-rich school like Marquette.
Right,
they're not going to get a guy like Cooper Flagg. Like Duke's going to get him, or one of the big brands is going to get him. So you can't rely on. We're going to get the 18-year-old kid who's going to go to the NBA and be a top 3, if not the number 1 overall pick, to help carry us to a title. We're not going to get that guy because we don't have either the resources, the money, facilities, or the team already around him that's going to give us the inside track to getting a guy like that. I hate to use Rutgers as an example again, but you have 2 of the top 3 guys that are going to be in the NBA draft. Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. They come to Rutgers now. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for them this year in terms of team success, but it's like that's a rare exception where you get 2 guys like that, and who knows where that goes. But again, Rutgers is still a Power 4, so still a Big Ten school.
Right.
It's not like at that point, who can you afford to string your basketball team along or your football team along? It's like, yeah, we're going to rely on the 18-year-old kid. Like football, you rely on a kid that's 18 years old. No, you're probably going to redshirt him and get him ready for 2 years after that, because it's going to take a while to acclimate.
And you got to hope that 18-year-old who gets redshirted doesn't go in the portal himself, because I don't want to name the team because I'm not 100% sure of the team, but there was a guy that transferred into a school in December.
Yep.
And then this team brought in another player at the same position, and he transferred out.
Yeah.
And he was there from December to March, and he didn't even play a game. He just went through spring practices.
Yeah.
It's like out of control.
I think this past spring windows, we again, in On3, we're tracking the transfer portal pretty much every day, but I think this past spring window, we've seen a lot more conversation about, okay, now it's out of control, because you've seen. We've seen it even with early enrollees to some of these schools for football, because they can enroll in the winter, so they're coming in January. But because the spring portal opens, if they're performing well in spring practice, and another school's like, we have a position of need, we'll give you money, because this school didn't give you enough money, we'll give you more to just hop in the portal. These guys are on campus as early freshmen for 3 months, and it's like, all right, I'll see you.
They're out the door.
I'm going to another school. We see it all the time, and we've seen multiple scenarios of players transferring in the winter window. So let's just say you're at school A, you transfer in the winter, now you go to school B, you're there for 3 months, then they can hop right back into the portal, and they can go to school C in the spring, which is that to me is mind-boggling. There,
makes no sense.
That to me needs to be fixed a little bit. As long as like the coach isn't fired,
right.
Coach firings, I say okay, free for all, go do whatever you got to do. But in that case where you can pop in at 3 schools in the span of about 5 months?
Yeah.
That to me is absurd.
That's
but
nuts.
So I feel like we could talk about NIL for a couple more hours, but let's transition back a little bit. So just a couple fun questions here. So what was your favorite stadium arena that you've been to?
Can I appease the crowd and say the Rack? No.
It's not the Rack anymore. Jersey Mike's
That's
Arena.
right, Jersey Mike's Arena. Yeah, I'm gonna get in trouble for that one. Obviously, aside from being at the alma mater, it is a great atmosphere. Wrestling, to me, it's the best. I'll be biased. It's the best wrestling atmosphere. Best arena or stadium? I'll go football. when I was in college, I was lucky enough that I got some good road trips my senior year of college for football. So we went to the Big House in Ann Arbor for Michigan. That was awesome, and I did see Nebraska. I love Lincoln. I love the town of Lincoln. That's a great college town. Nebraska was a great environment, but I think overall as a stadium atmosphere, Nebraska was great. We were really high up. It was also really hot, so like we're wearing full suits as students. We're just like we're sweating in the photo deck up in floor 7. But that was great for even I think even Nebraska went like 4-8 or 5-7 that year, and they saw 90,000 people there, which was insane. But the Big House in Michigan, I would say that was like the. You want to talk about a pinch me moment? That was like, oh, this is really cool. I'm broadcasting the Big House. And how old was I? 21.
Yeah, over 100,000 people.
Yeah, there was like 120,000 people or whatever it was for. It was like a late September, maybe it was a late October game. Rutgers, Michigan. It was actually, if you remember back in 2017, Rutgers they went 4-8, but that was a game. I think they were winning. I think it was like 17-14. Rutgers was winning or something along those lines. No, it was 14-7. They were tied up, and then I think they were beating up. The quarterback was John O'Korn from Michigan. This is before Jim Harbaugh had like an elite quarterback. John O'Korn was the quarterback. They were beating him up, and then he put in Brandon Peters. Harbaugh did. Peters, I think, ended up at Illinois like a year or two later. But Brandon Peters comes in for the second half, and they outscored him, and then Rutgers loses 35-14. So I was like, oh, boy. I was like, oh, so close to an upset call, but what are you going to do?
Favorite athlete?
I like that answer.
Favorite athlete?
Kind of hard not to go with that.
He's sitting right there. Favorite athlete? Again, I'm a huge Eagle fan, so I grew up loving Donovan McNabb. So I would say he's probably my all-time favorite, just for nostalgia purposes, and like really getting the football around when he started like really peaking with the Eagles. And I still have like I have an old figurine of McNabb. It's on my desk, so I would say if I had to pick one off the top of my head, it's probably Donovan McNabb.
Reggie White a little too early for you?
Yeah, it was, unfortunately. I missed the Reggie White days.
I was around for him.
I became a huge Eagle fan probably around like I want to say 01, 02, and then like really 03. Of course, people were back. You can call me a front runner now, but it wasn't a front runner. Like, yeah, they were good, but like always lost in the championship game. So like they were always coming up a little bit short.
The Giants used to beat them, then now they can't.
Dream interview guest.
There's probably a couple. From a wrestling perspective, I would say right now, if you're talking about a current athlete or coach, I actually would say Cale Sanderson. From a wrestling perspective, because I feel like he does not do anything, and I feel like he's going to be. I feel like Cale Sanderson is going to stay quiet in terms of the media availability. Like he does media availability, but I think podcast wise, he's a guy who will never do podcasts until I think he's done. So from wrestling, I would say him. From a sports media perspective, from when I talk to somebody in my industry. Like I said, I have a couple. I would love to actually interview one-on-ones. I interned for him, Chris Mad Dog Russo.
He'd be fun.
Yeah, he'd be a great one. And it's funny because even a couple years after I interned for him, when I was still working there part-time, he never forgot me, which I'll appreciate. I always appreciate that because I only work for him.
He might have forgot your name though, because he's not too good with names.
That's true. Or he likes to expand my nicknames.
Yes.
Nobody else calls me Nicky. I think he did a couple times, so that was pretty funny. And then I guess just an athlete in general. I guess if I have to stick to the Eagles a little bit, I guess I would say. I mean, I would say McNabb just for nostalgia purposes. But if I wanted to, if he was still alive, I would have loved to interview a guy like Chuck Bednarik because I am a bit of a Eagles historian nerd, so I would love to interview and pick the brain of Concrete Charlie for sure.
So what's next? What's up? What's on the plate for you moving forward?
I have a bit of an off season now. It's May, so we'll roll through the summer at On3. Just getting ready for college football training camp and NFL training camp. So it's a little bit more of a downtime right now. Just I'll probably just bang out a couple more. I do a lot of wrestling podcasts for On3, so some more wrestling podcasts along the way. It slows down a little bit, but then like once the summer hits, because it's a bit of a dead time for sports, I'll start hitting up coaches and be like, hey, let me know how your summer's going. We'll preview the season. A couple months out, I'll bang out a handful of those, and then gear up for football season, which is back to the high school broadcasting, and then eventually wrestling will swing back around in November. It is public knowledge that my wife's pregnant, which is awesome.
Congratulations!
So, thank you very much.
I didn't want to bring that up, but I did see it.
No. It is public knowledge, so it's for the public consumption. She's due in November, so I'm really excited about that. I think we're finding out in a week or two at the most if it'll be a boy or a girl. So. Really excited about that. It's been a whirlwind. We got married last August. We bought our house in February, and now our first ones on the way. So it's kind of crazy, just especially talking about my college days, trying to get into the business, and now 10 years later, I'm already thinking about, all right, what's my kid gonna do now? So,
So is there any advice for young professionals trying to break into the sports broadcasting or journalism you could talk about?
It's different. The business is always changing, and I've been asked before, by prospective students, whether high school or college, like, how do I break in? How do I break in? I still don't know how to break in. Even with me at this point, just like you gotta keep trying stuff, and I think the medium has changed even just drastically since I was since I started college, over 10 years ago. When I started, it was like, newspapers were still around. Newspapers weren't totally dying yet. There was still a big writing space, which is what I do now. But again, it's just straight news, and it's a little bit different because you're looking for search wins. You're trying to you want to be accurate, but also you want to be first. So that's like what writing is now. It's quick. There's not many big long form pieces anymore, and a lot of stuff. COVID changed everything with podcasts. Kind of like what you guys are doing now. It's like podcasts are great, but you need the video element now. Right. You need these elaborate setups. You need great guests, and sometimes people don't want to, at this point, listen to podcasts. They're just like, how do you stand out as a host? Well, you're gonna start getting great guests, and then maybe your listeners will be like, I kind of like the host of this show. You know what I mean? So that's the way I treat it. Just like, I don't think people want to hear me talk forever, so I'm just like, who can I get that people want to hear, and then maybe it builds up my own brand at that point, selfishly. But you have to be able to adapt. I think knowing how to do talk radio, podcasts, production in terms of video, audio. You had to mix everything 10 years ago, but I think you have to be able to be very flexible and creative, and know that going in, if you want to do this, you're not going to make a lot of money right off the bat. If you make a lot of money, you might have hit it big after a long 10, 20, 30-year journey. So you have to really love it. I think, basically, if you're going to do it because you really love it, that's where I would recommend do it. Don't try to get into it because of the money. I think if you really do something like this, whether it's sports media or just news in general, you have to love it. You have to love the grind to get there. I worked about 2 years part-time out of college. I was splitting my time between where I live right now, down in South Jersey, and going all the way up to New York City to work at Sirius XM for part-time hours, overnight sometimes. I stayed at my cousin's house half the week in order to make sure I didn't have to go all the way back down and travel the entire state. So stuff like that, got to be willing to do it. And then just, again, I think the biggest thing is be flexible and be willing to try new things, and don't be afraid to, I guess, try to stand out. Because, everyone uses YouTube now. It seems like everybody has, the old joke from like old radio heads is like, oh, everyone has a mic in their basement now. It's like, pretty much. And if you can create content that, even to a niche audience, but if you stand out and know how to present yourself, especially with social media and whatnot, people are going to be attracted to your content. They're going to watch it, and maybe you can make something out of it. So I think the biggest thing is just be flexible and just keep trying content. Like don't say, all right, I'm going to start out my podcast. I'm going to record once a week. Or I'm going to do I'm just going to record one thing a week and just see if it sticks. No, you need to try 1,000 different things in the course of 2 weeks and see, all right, something might stick, and then just keep working on it from there.
That's kind of where we're at.
It's kind of what we're doing. Yeah.
There you go. See what sticks.
Nick, where can people find you if they want to follow your work?
At Nick Kosko 59 on Twitter and Instagram. It's NickKosko 59. 59 is my old football number, which didn't play well. So, but I do love that number. So yeah, it's the same handle for Twitter and Instagram. Most of my work stuff's on Twitter. I've put more on my Instagram as well, but obviously I'm reachable on both those platforms if we just want to chat, or you want to come on my show, or have me on your show, or just or tell me that I'm just blatantly wrong about my rankings, which is fine too.
We'll tag you in everything.
Yeah,
so.
that's right.
We'll definitely tag you. Well, Nick, we really want to thank you again for coming on in. This was a pretty fun interview.
Oh yeah,
and enjoyed it a lot. And so we thank you for listening. That's a wrap on episode 21 of Destination Talk. Until we see you again.